everyone, and thank you for the Saturday morning today. As Shahab just mentioned, volunteers are the lifeblood of this organization, and that's the reason we have been putting all those events together successfully for the last 10 years. My name is Shama Khan, and I am the chair for volunteers at opensv. I have been associated with Open for a long time, and it gives me great pleasure to put together the forum and many other events that we do on monthly and quarterly basis as well. At these events, we hear many inspiring stories of struggle and triumph. Of course, it is always most impactful to share a story about one of us. Ashar Aziz and Fireeye is one of those. Please join me in welcoming Arif Halali of Sequoia Capital and Gaurav Garg of Wing Venture Partners on stage, who will regale with us behind the music themed look on Fireeye.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for waking up early on a Saturday morning and coming in. My name's Arif Halali. I'm a partner at Sequoia. I'm here with Gaurav, and it's really a great pleasure to be here to talk about Fireeye, which is really a quite remarkable story. And I say that in the context of all the businesses that Sequoia has been involved in. It's really a quite remarkable story. I know that Ashar wanted to be here today. Maybe Gaurav, you could say, I know Gaurav, you're very close to him in terms of, he wasn't quite able to make it.
Yeah, it's too bad you have me instead of the protagonist, pale imitation. Ashar had some surgery earlier this week that was relatively urgent. So it's too bad, again, that he couldn't be here, but we'll do our best.
It is too bad, but then again, when we asked Ashar, who's the one person who'd have a unique insight into the company, Gaurav was the first person who he mentioned, because Gaurav was a partner at Sequoia for many years and worked very closely with Ashar from the very beginning of the company, right the way through its life. So I think we'll have a unique and an interesting perspective. But maybe we should just start with a few of just the basics. I'm sure most people here have heard of Fireeye, certainly, and are aware that it has a Pakistani founder in Ashar, but maybe not everyone is quite fully current on exactly what the company does. So, in simple terms, Gaurav, maybe you could just tell us, just to begin with, what exactly does Fireeye do?
Has everyone heard of antivirus? Yes. So what's happened is that antivirus is a 20-year-old technology that was developed to fight infections or breaches on your machines for the attacks that were propagated by email in the wake of Hotmail 20 years ago. As the world has changed, it's become much more web-centric, a lot more user-generated oriented. It turned out, as it should over 20 years, that the attacks got a lot more sophisticated, more algorithmic, more polymorphic, which means they would change all the time, and there was no way to find these attacks. And Ashar had this idea back in 2004 for how we might fight advanced infections, like the sort we're seeing today and that the newspapers are full of, with Target and Google and a whole bunch that you've heard of over the years. So for a long time, and obviously there are imitators now, Fireeye was the only technology that could pick up a very large fraction of these more advanced attacks that we're seeing now, launched by professional criminals, stealing credit cards of the sort that targeted Target, and from nation states, which are incredibly prevalent. And I'll share some anecdotes about the types of things that Fireeye was able to find that no one else caught before. So it is the evolution of antivirus in the modern world.
So it's the last line of defense.
Yes.
Fireeye sits behind everything else and finds the bad stuff that nobody else can find. And today, just to give a sense of the scale of the company, I know the company recently announced earnings, just to people have a sense for its size and scale.
So this year, 2014, the company, now that it's public, I have to be careful, the company has stated that we will do somewhere between $500 and $550 million in bookings, which is really the main measure, because the revenue model, there's a lot of subscription revenue. So the revenue will be somewhere over 400 million, but it's not the best indicator of the nature of the business. The market cap, even with the the implosion in the public markets for these high growth stocks. It's about $4.5 billion, and the company's been growing at a rate of over 100% a year for many, many, many years. In the last quarter, we grew 160% relative to the prior year, just to give you a sense of the trajectory of this company, even at this large a scale.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty remarkable company. I think it's got 2,265 customers, only 2,000 employees,
Yes.
and a $4 billion-ish market cap. And this is a company that didn't exist 10 years ago. So let's go back in time to the beginning, because I think looking at the great success today is always interesting to understand exactly how these things start, particularly for people who may be thinking of starting businesses themselves. What was the kernel of the idea or the nucleus, or what was the impetus for starting the company when it got to, how did that whole process happen?
I can only speak from my experience, obviously, and I can't tell you what was happening in Ashar's mind before he talked to me about the idea. But what I can tell you is my wife used to work for him back in 1999 at his first company, and which was eventually acquired by Sun, and we had become friends in the process. And he and his wife were over for dinner one day. This is almost exactly 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And he says to me, there are these new threats, not viruses, they're called worms. We call them all sorts of new names now. They were not very prevalent back then, and I think it's going to be a big problem. And I have this unique idea on how to solve it, and I want to talk to you about it. I was like, sure. So he came and talked to me about this idea that he had and this piece of technology that he was still vetting in his mind. He wasn't really sure if he wanted to do this. This is how all these companies start. They're a little bit foggy. The problem is a little foggy because you're looking 5 years out, right? And you have an intuition for what might be, but you really have no data, right? It's very different from the world of the consumer where, RF, no offense, but the angels take all the risks and you guys show up when
Well, I wouldn't. It certainly doesn't feel that way, Gaurav, when we invest. But anyway, keep going. The angels fund lots of experiments, and then in the consumer world, we look at the ones that can be companies and work with them to build real companies.
But this is a lot more foggy, right? And so Ashar came to me with this idea, and to be honest, I was really captivated with the technology.
And just a word on the technology. He was going to apply virtualization techniques here, right? To put things in a container. I don't know. So which was a pretty novel idea, I would imagine.
So if we're going to meander into that territory, let me go on and I'll bore you guys for 2 minutes. So the problem with all security products is that you have to strike a balance between crying wolf too many times. These are called false positives, where you say 500 things are wrong every minute, and nobody can pay attention to that. And then on the other side, missing what's important. And the question you're facing is, how tight do I make the filter? If the filter is too wide, you don't alert very often, but you miss a lot of things, right? If you think about it, if the filter is very wide, a lot of stuff's going to fall through it that you want it to catch. And if the filter is too tight, a lot of things get caught in the net, but most of them are junk. So he had found a way, which was kind of a two-stage methodology, where he would be able to have a really wide filter at the top so that some things fell through. And then in the really tight filter, which was very important to make sure that you caught everything, he literally would take whatever was coming in and run it through the software it was intended to go through. So for example, if something came in and was going to run in Adobe Acrobat or in Word or something else, he would literally run the program, I'm simplifying, to see if it behaved badly, right? It wasn't a learning technology. It was literally built from first principles. And when you heard this and you figured out that he had figured out a way to reduce the complexity and the processing by over a factor of 1,000,000, right? It just sounded very, very cool and really important technology. Whether there was a real market at that point, I think we were so enamored by the technology, we kind of let it go, to be honest. And therein actually lay the problem, which we'll get to in a minute.
So Ashar has the idea.
Yes.
He wants to raise money. What was the process of raising money from Sequoia like? So, what was what was it like?
So this too is kind of semi-amusing, and it's a little bit of an inside joke. because perhaps most of you don't know the people involved. But as I was talking to Ashar, and I realized this was mostly about technology and thinking forward and not asking too many mundane questions about the present, I decided I would bring Ashar in to talk to the two people that run Sequoia, or ran Sequoia, I guess,
the time,
is a better word. One was Mike Moritz of Yahoo, Google, Flextronics, PayPal fame. And Mike is very intuitive and very acerbic and very funny. But also, he can be very decisive in the moment, and it's hard to change his mind at times. And Doug Leone, who's a spectacular investor, incredibly thoughtful, but also is given to making black and white decisions, which is fabulous in a venture firm, but sometimes they're not always the right decisions. So I took my life in my hands and I said, okay, I'm going to just have Ashar talk to these two guys because they can look forward and they won't ask too many stupid questions about the present. So the idea was to raise $250,000 and have Ashar come and hang with us in the building. So I go and I'm shaking with fear. Ashar comes in, he talks. It was not a great presentation, I can tell you, because we didn't really know what we were doing. It was kind of this, we didn't really know what it was. And the meeting ends in about 45 minutes, and I walk out with Mike and Doug, and I said, what do you think? They said, we think you should go in and close him right now. We should invest. And sure, Ashar came in the following Monday, but the die was cast at that point. And a week later, he was in the back of the building working on his company. So this is an incredibly unusual story for those of you that know Sequoia, which makes very considered, thoughtful decisions with more work than any venture firm out there. But it was just one of these intuitive likings for Ashar's technical chops and how far the technology was ahead of its time, and the inkling, which eventually turned out to be true, that there would be a big problem here that would need to be solved.
So Shah then took up residence at Sequoia in a room that's now a wiring closet at our offices.
That's literally true.
Yeah, no,
It was
it's
a cube.
absolutely- Yeah, well, yeah, and then went through some early validation work, raised Series A. Maybe you could just talk a bit about this. Was it hard to get the technology out, or was it easy? And then when it was out, what was the market response? I mean, the dream is always you bring a product out and it just takes off. What happened?
So we raised a Series A. We did the usual thing. We started building the product. I had a friend who was the VP of sales at a company called Aruba Networks, which is down the street here. It's about $700 million in revenue. And he, unfortunately, had to leave Aruba right on the eve of the IPO for some former things that happened with the government. He sued the government for framing him, basically, and he won the lawsuit. And he decided he didn't want to have Aruba in the crosshairs of these government lawyers. So, and this is a pretty public story, by the way, so I can tell it. So I said, Dave, come over and be VP of sales here. And he and Ashar met, and Ashar's wonderful one-on-one at just charming these very talented executives. So Dave shows up in the building, and he's a machine. He got us into 200 trials in the first year. Can you believe that? For a startup. Guess how many bad things we found in that first year and a half? Anyone care to guess? 2. In 200 trials, we had 2 successes. And we won 1 customer, which was my former company, Redback Networks, which frankly was a favor. So here we are with this product that shipped that was utterly ineffective. And the complexity of this thing was absolutely enormous. You know, I talked about Adobe Acrobat and Word. Imagine having to instrument the behavior of 500 protocols like that you traditionally use in the PC, from communications protocols to application protocols to all sorts of things to chat. And we were about a tenth of the way there, which is part of the reason we didn't find anything, right? And we had spent a lot of time building up the core technology, but we hadn't instrumented all these applications, and we were out there in the market. And it was incredibly terrifying and frustrating, and a whole bunch of funny stories associated with it.
So what was So the technology wasn't quite there, the market wasn't quite there, things aren't working, you're burning money. I mean, I would imagine there'd be some, were there dark times at this point? Were there times when you're feeling, my goodness, you know, is this going to fly? Did a Shah have dark times when he questioned what he was doing?
Well, I never had a doubt. Just kidding. I'll tell you the one funny story. I literally told Ashar in a board meeting once, as the company was meandering, I said, Ashar, this is the second worst company I'm involved with. And that's how frustrating it was.
Who was the worst?
A company. Ashar didn't have the courage to ask me that.
He probably looked on the bright side, said, great, there's somebody else, you can focus on them, leave me alone.
Well, the worst was a company where the two founders lied to us about something.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
it's still around, which is kind of funny. So, well, here's kind of what happened. We were going nowhere. So we went and talked to Gartner, which everybody does. And Gartner said, well, there's no market with what you're doing, which was true. But the technology can be applied to this other problem. And we said, OK. We had this marketing guy. And
what was the other problem?
Network access control, which was a very hyped thing about 7, 8 years ago. There was no market, as it turned out, as well. But Gartner said, go do it. So we raised another round of financing, and another round of financing, 2 more rounds. And we went off and chased this network access control thing. We spent $15, $20 million. And it went nowhere as well.
So Gartner sent you off on this wild goose chase.
Wild goose chase.
That's great. So things are bad before, now you shot off into left field on some wild goose chase, chasing something that doesn't exist. And now, are we approaching the financial crisis at this point, or was that looming?
Yeah, it was fortunately, actually, we were exactly approaching the financial crisis. So
Okay.
this was in 2008.
Right.
We're running out of money.
Running
in the meantime, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, running out of money at a time when, you know, Silicon Valley, everyone's thinking that, you know, everything's going to be hitting the wall, and RIP good times, and
this thing is dead. It's been around for 3.5 years. It has had 2 false turns, right? I mean, it's just floundering. And Ashar, in the middle of all of this, said, you know, the problem is we're instrumenting the wrong thing. And we'd had many discussions, but I got to tell you, it was in his head. And I didn't fully appreciate it, nor did Pramod Haq, who was on the board with us. And I don't think anyone in the company truly appreciated it except for Ashar and his really tight band of engineers right in the beginning.
appreciated what?
I'll get to it. That we had, if we instrumented a few other things because of the way the world was changing and the web was changing, we may actually go and find things and have a problem worth solving. The problem with security is there's 800 companies that shout from the rooftops. And you're not going to out-bullhorn Symantec. The only way you're going to win is by having efficacy. You go for a problem that is important enough to solve. If a problem is 98% solved, no one cares. It's in the realm of insurance, right? Whether you take it from 98 to 99 is utterly irrelevant. If it's a problem that's 50% solved that nobody really cares about, you're still in trouble. So it has to be a problem that is unsolved and that people really care about. And Ashar had an intuition that because the web was changing, and in 2008, if you think back, the emergence of YouTube and Facebook and so on, his intuition was the fact that the web was no longer curated, but was mostly user-generated, presented an opportunity for the bad guys to start infecting your machines through all of these vectors that were user-generated, videos put up, a photo on Facebook, and so on and so forth. So he went and instrumented a narrow part of the web to catch things with the technology we had.
So this is a really interesting situation where you have a visionary founder. They've had this technology for 3-4 years. They've run after 3 or 4 markets which haven't worked out, but now they feel they've cracked it and feel that, you know, this is the big change, this the advent of user-generated content. But they need more money, so again have to go back to investors to raise the money to go after it for a 4th time. in a financial crisis where no one is inclined to believe. What was that fundraising process like?
Well, the prior round had been done at a valuation of $86 million. We were unable to raise money at $7 million pre in this company from third-tier venture firms. That's how bad it was. And in the meantime, we had put this thing out into the hands of a few customers, and we had started talking to the government. But it was just excruciating. We ran around for 4 or 5 months, and there was not a peep. This was December 2008 to about maybe March, April 2009. And if you go back, while things exploded in 2008, March 2009 was really the bottom of the financial crisis. You know, when these things explode, it keeps going down for a little bit before it turns. So we just, all of our timing was wrong. And it was just
so the company's
hard.
running out of money. You can't raise money from third-tier venture firms. What do? What do they come back to their existing investors, I guess?
So we'd put the product out in the hands of 4 or 5 customers. Excuse me, I'm recovering from pneumonia. I'm about 5 weeks into it, so you're not going to get infected or RF.
That sounds great, Gaurav. Sounds great.
So we had started talking to the CIA, and they were big fans of the technology, and we had shipped this new product, which had been put in the hands of a few customers. One of them was Yahoo. And Ashar and I and Pramod, who was on the board, had been talking the whole time. And we put it into, somehow we persuaded the finance department, not Yahoo Finance, the internal finance department at Yahoo, to use this. They had 800 or 1,000 computers and servers. And we discovered that 300 of them were being spied on by gangs in the Ukraine and in Russia. And there was the usual, you're an early stage startup, you're selling to this giant web scale company, they always want everything for free. There was all this negotiating back and forth. And I don't know what happened, but we were just so tired and so frustrated. We just made up a number and told Yahoo, we want $500,000. That's it, or you're not getting this. And you know what? We realized that they were going to cave and buy it. And we had the same experience at PG&E, where we wanted $300,000, big dollars for a little startup. And I can't remember what the third, it was Ricoh copiers. Same thing, $300,000. And one night, after talking to the guy at Yahoo and talking to the guys at the CIA, I thought this company was going to go away. And I finally had the courage, and Ashar still remembers this vividly. I called him at 10 o'clock or 9:30 at night, and I said, Ashar, I think we should try and put together a round from Sequoia and Norvest, the insiders, because there's something here. I can just tell that we're going in, we're finding things that nobody else has found before. We're finding things in volume, where in 800 computers, you find 300 are infected. And people are willing to pay massive amounts of dollars, which means this is a problem people are willing to pay for. No one's going to believe us, but we know, and we at Sequoia are going to do the work because that's what we do here. We're actually going to find out what no one else is going to work on to figure out and see if it's worth funding the company. So that's kind of how, and let me just continue. So I brought him back. Pramod took him into the partnership at Norvest. We had, not me, but all the others do the reference checks. One of the reference checks was with Harvard. The CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer at Harvard, told one of my partners, he said, not only do I like this so much that I insisted the company drop off 4 boxes at my office. I got in my pickup truck, and I drove all over New England to my buddies, dropping this box off at the University of New Hampshire. He drove up there and insisted they put it into their network. Right? These were the kinds of reference checks we were getting. And I told you about the Yahoo story. And it was one of these things where you have to invest. these things don't come along very often. And it
Right.
still looked incredibly fragile. Remember, nobody could fund this thing at 7. Somehow, Ashar and I talked the Sequoia partnership into doing it at 20 million pre. And look, to their credit, despite how terrible the company had looked for so long, once people saw the reference checks, everyone was incredibly enthusiastic. And the discussion was 4 minutes long, something like that. So it's a huge credit to Norvest and Sequoia that we did the work and had the courage and the conviction to back this at the worst possible time at the bottom of the crisis, literally April 2009.
What role did you mentioned the CIA a couple of times. I'm curious, what role did the government play as an early customer, and how helpful was that to the company?
The way the CIA works with funding companies is very, very rarely do they actually invest, and it goes back and forth. The way they work is they find other customers in the government for the product, and they effectively take a commission in stock for the sales that you do, for helping you. It's kind of like a warrant, right? And they introduced us to a few people. Let me see what I can talk about. I don't know if I can talk about anything. But I could say that the White House mansion was one of them. I won't tell you what we found there. The US House of Representatives was another. These are all publicly known customers.
I'm sure it got their attention when Fireeye goes in and finds that the White House has a whole bunch of people snooping around on its systems.
Actually, the White House, it was worse than that. They could control it.
Great. So you have the Chinese turning on and off the lights of the White House.
Exactly.
That's perfect.
Literally, they could turn the lights on and off at the White House. So they were incredibly helpful. It also turned out that around this time, the Chief Information Security Officer of the entire US Department of Defense for the prior 9 years was retiring. And we got introduced to him, and somehow we talked him in late 2009 to join our board. And at this point, the board was 3 people, Pramod and Ashar and me. And Bob Lenz joined the board. And he realized how important this technology was. He took Ashar to see Leon Panetta, literally, who ran the CIA. He took Ashar to personally see General Alexander, who ran the NSA.
I don't know why, but I just love the idea that here's a Pakistani going in and talking to the CIA about security and how they need to be more secure on their networks. There's just something great about that, don't you think? Just fantastic.
And Ashar, in his charming way, utterly mesmerized these people. I got to tell you, they're pretty xenophobic, right? And Ashar charmed them. Leon Panetta would talk about Ashar at conferences, with 1,000 defense conferences. He would talk about Fireeye and Ashar, and it just, within 6 months, it completely turned the table because we were being socialized by General Alexander and Leon Panetta to the entire defense intelligence community. One day, we got a call from the Department of State or Homeland Security, I forget. And they said, we're sending you an order for $5 million. We had never talked to these people, ever, right? That's how much it turned the tables. And look, a little bit of it is luck. A lot of it is Ashar charming these people. There's a very famous guy called Richard Hale, who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Security Agency. He's this kind of the Chief Information Security Officer. Ashar and I flew out to see this guy in DC. And he's kind of this, when he's working, he's kind of this rumpled guy. He spent 2.5 hours with us, and we said, Richard, we got a flight to catch. And he said, let me drop you to the airport. And he drove out to the airport for an hour so that he could continue talking to Ashar. So it was just this incredible process. They not only did they take us into American agencies, they flew us all over the world. Bob Lenz, literally, to this day, he's still on the board, he flies to the Middle East with the salespeople with Ashar. Last quarter, He did a tour of 41 cities with Ashar, going to US embassies, hosting companies in the US embassy with the security technology, talking to defense departments all over the world. In 60 days, they went to 41 cities. So, you have to have an insider if you're going to work with the government who has credibility. Otherwise, they're the toughest nut to crack, right? But somehow or the other, I'll say it was a lot of luck involved, and we had no idea what we were getting into. But a lot of credit to Ashar for charming these guys, excuse me, and to our luck in getting Bob Lentz and these big guys to talk about the company publicly. So
Okay,
somewhat serendipitous, but oh my God, thank goodness.
Made a big difference, right? So the company is coming out of its nosedive now, and is starting to take off. I mean, I'm just wondering, could you guys believe it after trying for so long internally? Was it kind of like, I can't believe it, it's actually working? People must have been incredulous as you're looking at the numbers each quarter as they're going up and things are working, and it was just must have been such a different experience for people.
Yeah, and you got to remember, at this point in the company's life, there were 2 executives in the entire company. Ashar did the job of 5 executives, and we had a VP of engineering who's still there, who's spectacular, and our manufacturing guy ran sales. I mean, this is how funny this thing was. And this was all the way until 2010, 4 years ago. There was nothing, no infrastructure. If I asked at a board meeting, how many trials are you guys doing? They would have no idea. They literally had no idea. And it was the most chaotic experience I've ever been through, because you were growing like crazy, and there was no infrastructure to do absolutely anything. And then we made it worse. We hired a sales guy who is probably the best security sales guy in the Valley. He took the company from 4 million to 15 million to 61 million in successive years with 0 infrastructure. Everything was falling off. All the wheels were falling off the bus, but it was utterly exhilarating. And obviously, needless to say, now the company was very visible. We were adding customers. I'll tell you, though, there was still one problem, which is no one wanted to believe they had a problem, because they've spent all this money on security, and you go in and say, look, you guys are not secure at all. So this was a continuous conundrum. And now you kind of had to change tack to building up the infrastructure of the company. Otherwise, we were just going to blow up. There would be too many customer support problems. There would just be things we didn't deliver. Maybe we didn't ask people for a check when they owed us $2 million. I mean, these are the types of things that were happening. So we had to change tack, and we had to figure out a way to make it politically correct for people to admit that there was a problem. Right? So it kind of changed 2010 to 12.
Got it. So now as the company starts taking off, the company starts becoming visible, any company in Silicon Valley that goes from whatever the numbers you gave, 5 to 15 to 60, which is a pretty incredible ramp, that company starts to pop up on radar screens, get attention. Bigger companies start saying, wait a second, who are these guys walking into our accounts, getting $5 million without doing anything? And I would imagine that Ashar started to get calls from newfound friends saying, oh, we'd love to get to know you, from big security companies and so forth. Which I'm just curious, sorry, at what point did that start? And then I'm sure these guys started tabling offers, and often teams who've been through the wars and have struggled, when they finally get there, very often they're so tired that they say, gosh, I'll take $100 million and go sit on an island and relax somewhere, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Just talk a little bit about that and how that played out in the thought process there.
So you got to set this in the context of what I'm about to say. Nobody believed they had a problem. Nobody thought there was a market. This company was incredibly stealth. No one had really heard about it until about $30, $40 million a year. And Ashar, you can tell from my discussion about the wheels falling off the bus, he's not particularly operational at running a huge company. And so we'd been looking for a CEO. We'd interviewed all the people that worked for the CEO at Symantec and McAfee. Every one of them came and told us, and the company was doing $20 million a year. My job, we wouldn't tell them the numbers. My job is to get you to $5 million a year and help you sell this thing for $100 million. And we'd go, I mean, again, we wouldn't say anything because we didn't want to let them know what was going on. We'd say, but we're doing 5 times that already and growing like a weed. You don't really know what you're talking about, right? So in this context, we probably interviewed 60 people to be CEO of this company, just to let you know. In this context, Ashar gets a phone call from a large vendor. He is summoned to their, I think, headquarters, and locally, and they tell him, we would like to buy the company for $400 million. And Ashar was polite. He came back and he called us and he said, no way. This is what these guys want to do. We're not selling, right? We're like, yeah, we're not selling. That's the end of the story. It was a 30-second discussion. And you gotta, I mean, just the conviction in the technology, in the market momentum, in the problem we were solving. I got to tell you, this is a place where if you questioned people on efficacy and continuing to improve efficacy, engineers have cried in board meetings. This is a place where the VP of engineering choked up because we pushed him and literally was unable to talk when he was up on stage for 2 minutes. And we weren't being mean. They just take everything very personally. So I have a feeling, that we had conviction, obviously, as board members, but ultimately with any company, the decision to sell or not is up to the founders and the management team. The board doesn't control it, because if they want to sell, they're just going to tell the board everything is terrible, because that's what they're feeling, right? That's why they want to sell. And if they don't want to sell, they're just going to say everything is rosy, because that's actually what they're feeling. So we were convinced, but all of these guys, to a man, were incredibly convinced. A year and a half goes by. Fast forward to December 2011 or early 2012, I don't remember. I get a phone call from another very major vendor. This time they didn't call Ashar. Maybe they'd heard this story. And the guy literally on the phone offers me $1.2 billion with zero negotiation. That was the opening offer. And I told him, I'll talk to the guys, but I don't think we're going to do this. And same thing. I went back and I talked to the rest of the board, and it was a 30-second discussion. So you can imagine going from the depths of late 2009, early 2010, up to late 2009, just 2 years go by when you couldn't raise money at $7 million pre, and you're turning down as a founder a $1.2 billion offer with zero thought about it, because there was so much conviction. It's just amazing.
Really, really amazing. So given that the goal was absolutely not to sell the company, now you got to build the company. You have to start by building out the management team. There was a VP of sales. There are all these operational problems. You have to bring in other executives. And there's the question of the CEO. And so maybe you could talk a bit about that, Gaurav, and how exactly, I mean, people look at it from the outside and say, Shah does such a great job, and then you get rid of him as CEO. How does that make any sense?
Fire the most successful CEO in the Valley, right?
Yeah, I mean, how does that make any sense? So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that process worked and how the board and Ashar thought about building the company.
This is a topic where I've had the funniest conversations ever that I've ever had with a founder. And it is a huge credit to Ashar's insistence on hiring world-class people. I talked about the VP of engineering. I talked about the VP of sales. There was one CEO candidate that I got to tell you I liked, and Ashar hated. And I tried to break the logjam by getting Mike Moritz involved. And Mike interviews this guy, and he comes out 20 minutes later. It's an unusually short interview. I said, Mike, what happened? He said, why are you trying to hire this guy with a one-digit IQ? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Ashar's right, right? And it's like, Mike, we're desperate. The wheels are falling off. So in Ashar's way, typical way, he decided that he didn't really tell us this, but he really decided. And it took us, we're kind of slow. It took us 6 months to figure out this is really what was going on. He decided that he was going to hire either the former CEO of Symantec or the former CEO of McAfee. And there was no one else that was going to meet his standards. And as I said, we're incredibly dense. But once we finally realized this, I literally personally took it upon myself to cold call Dave DeWalt, who I had heard by reputation was a phenomenal guy. He had been the CEO of McAfee, which had been sold to Intel. And I literally cold called him. I asked a recruiter to introduce me, and I was shocked when he took the call. And we talked for half an hour, and he seemed interested. And my heart was kind of like, my blood pressure must have been 150. I was like literally shaking talking to this guy. I couldn't believe he was interested. And we agreed that we were going to get together. And again, in the backdrop of Ashar turning down 60 people, well, all of us, some of these CEO candidates we wanted to hire, and Ashar just refused. So we get together in this dive of a restaurant somewhere. The three of us are sitting around a table about this size. And it's the first time I've met Dave, first time Ashar's met Dave, and we start to talk. And Ashar's talking about something, some technical thing. This is 10 minutes into the conversation, and Dave says, but Ashar, if you took that and if you did this other thing, you could do that. And Ashar looked at him, and he literally stopped in his tracks. And there were 3 or 4 topics where they kind of went, they built up their castle, their fantasy castle, and then they both stopped and looked at each other. And I'm just going back and forth. They'd completely lost me. The conversation had reached a level of technical expertise that was beyond me. And I looked at the two of them, and I knew this was going to happen, right? Because you could tell the two of them realized that they could build something monstrous together. And that was all it took. And this is sort of Ashar for you. And to Dave's credit, right, they immediately realized the whole process was less than half an hour, that they could work together and they could build something huge. But they're both guys who have very strong opinions. They're really tough negotiators. And from that day, it literally took us 6 months to get Dave into the building. I spent probably 200 hours that year talking to Dave, persuading him, persuading the rest of the board. I would go talk to other stakeholders. Candidly, some of my partners at Sequoia, it's like, oh, you're never going to be able to hire that guy. It'll never happen, right? Just don't waste your time on it, right? But Ashar, and I would be convinced, but Ashar wouldn't let go, and we managed to get this guy into the building who just in months addressed all the infrastructure problems and kind of stepped the company up to a level that we would never have been able to do otherwise. And Ashar took this company to $150 million a year in bookings with 3.5 executives in this company. I cannot tell you how rare that is. I would say even Larry Page was not able to take Google to $150 million. They had to bring in adult supervision, right? So it's just amazing to see this person who was technical, not really kind of a big scale manager, pull this off. We had a CFO, a VP of sales, a VP of engineering, and Ashar, so I guess 4. And there were some other people because the company was at $150 million a year. And he comes back. He called me and said, I talked to everybody for 20 minutes, let's get together. So I invited Pramod, and we get together, and Ashar was not present at this meeting. And Dave says, I spent 20 minutes with everybody. Here's what I think of all of the executives in the team. And we'd known these guys for years. And in a 20-minute conversation with each person, he nailed every one of those people 95%. It was the most uncanny thing I've ever seen in my life. He steps into the building, and he started hiring people that you wouldn't believe. The head of support for all of EMC, $20 billion a year. Dave talks him to joining Little Fireeye. Unbelievable. We had trouble finding a marketing person. So Dave called up the CEOs of 3 massive companies that had recently hired a marketing officer. One of them was Salesforce. He called up Benioff and said, Mark, so you hired this person. Who were the 2 runners-up? And he came up with a list of 6 people total. And Dave literally cold called these people, interviewed all 6 of them, and picked this lady who's just off the charts. So from the people that he knew to people like this, the hiring of the executives in a matter of 6 months, we went from this very tight team to the building up the infrastructure in a way we would never have imagined was possible. And to Dave's great credit, the 3 major executives and Ashar that we had, the VP of Sales, the VP of the CFO, and the VP of Engineering, are still in their roles. So he sort of took what we had that had worked and looked at the pieces that were missing, and literally in a matter of 6 months, fixed everything. So he said, we have 6 people in support for this company with 700 customers. It's broken. In 1 year, we grew the support department 1,000%. Right? It's just amazing to see how he had this immediate intuition for all the missing pieces, and he just went in and added everything. This was the part I was talking about where the wheels were falling off, and we've all learned from Dave. I mean, I've never seen something like this in, having started a company, growing it to $500 million as a founder, and then all the years at Sequoia. It was just amazing to watch. So amazing CEO.
I think the entire story of this company is truly amazing and remarkable. And thank you, Gaurav, for coming this morning and sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.